prayer spaces have spread all over the world. 31 different countries that we know about so far have tried this model of simple, creative, hospitable prayer spaces. And as Father Ruben's already mentioned, children and young people of all faiths and none have found something that connects with them in these prayer spaces. Some of them aren't called prayer spaces, some of them are called soul spaces or reflection spaces. Different schools call them different things, but they have the same content, the same activities, and we see the same results. Children and young people who are all made in the image of God, all made to connect with God, awakening to something. I find it really interesting when I read the stories of Jesus, the gospel stories, that Jesus' disciples only asked him to teach them one thing. It's true, isn't it? Think about it. There's only one thing that the disciples asked Jesus to teach them. Teach us to pray. Why did they do that? These disciples, they probably prayed every day of their lives. Many of them were devout. They were religious people. They were children of Israel. They had learnt to pray every day of their lives. So why did they ask Jesus, teach us to pray? I think it was because they saw something in the way that Jesus prayed. They saw something intimate and personal and powerful. They saw something meaningful in the way that Jesus connected with his Father in heaven that they didn't have. They prayed every day, but somehow they lacked the intimacy and the power and the reality of prayer, the honesty of prayer, and they saw it in Jesus, and so they said, teach us to pray. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was one of Jesus' disciples, I think I would have asked Jesus to teach me some other things. I would have asked Jesus, could you please teach me how to raise the dead? Because that seems like a really useful thing. Or even more, please could you teach me how to turn a packed lunch into enough food for everyone? Because that would be really useful. I would have asked Jesus lots of things, but Jesus' disciples recognized that there's only one thing that's really important. How do we commune with the Father? How do we connect with God? How do we express honestly? How do we turn the stuff inside our lives into communication with God? How do we stop praying all the things we think we ought to pray? Hello? We do that a lot, don't we? I feel like that in my own prayer life. When I take time to be with God, I start praying the things I think I'm supposed to pray. The things I think I'm supposed to say to God. Sometimes I imagine God kind of drumming his fingers. Carry on, Phil. So I'm just going to make a cup of tea. I'll be back in a minute. When I come back, I'd like to talk about what's going on inside you. I've heard all that stuff. I hear it from everyone else too. You say all the same things. But I know you're angry. I know you're in pain. I know you're delighted because you loved the sunrise this morning. I know you're worried about your children. I want to talk about that. Yeah? Maybe that's what the disciples saw in Jesus. They saw his joy and his pain, and they saw him connecting with his Father, and they saw authority. I think that's what's happening in prayer spaces. I think that these simple activities are kind of pushing away all the religious clutter. Yeah? Pushing away some of the stuff we think we ought to pray. And I think these activities are inviting children and young people to be honest, to talk about the stuff that's really going on in their lives, and they're desperate to do it. And that's why they are enjoying them. Whether they have faith or not, they want somewhere safe to connect. with God. That's what I think is going on. That's why I think, as we were yesterday in a school watching children and young people of different age groups connecting with God, while there was noise and there was children walking around, and even Father Reuben was getting a bit frustrated at one point, and there's children talking to one another, and then when you look at what they're writing on the whiteboard or the bits of paper, you see there's honesty, there's something raw from the inside being expressed to God, and I believe God is delighted with that. And that's what I think is going on with these prayer spaces. And what we're going to do in this first session is just remind ourselves a little bit about what prayer spaces are about. Some of you have been running prayer spaces in schools for the last few years, and you've been doing a fantastic job. I think it's great every now and again to just pause and stop and remind ourselves what this is all about. So I'm going to show you a few slides. Some of them, they may be similar to what you're already doing, and hopefully bring some reminders of what we're here for. Then we're going to have some coffee. And after that, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to ask, what's the theology, what's the values that sits behind prayer spaces? What is it that we're really trying to communicate? What is it about God that we're trying to express in these prayer spaces? And then we're going to do some work together in groups. There are some big questions I know some of you are facing around, as Father Reuben's already said, how do we host prayer spaces well with those of different cultures and different religions? What happens when pastoral issues come to the surface in prayer spaces? And how do we grow the spiritual life of our schools as well? And so we're going to look at those questions together. Does that sound okay? Yes. Great. Does anybody need to go to the toilet or have a wriggle, or, if you're feeling a bit stiff today, maybe ask the person next to you to give you a little massage, something like that. Or if you're feeling sleepy, ask them to poke you, do what you need to do. If you haven't already seen the Prayer Spaces in Schools website, I would really encourage you to visit there. There's also a Prayer Spaces in Schools Malta Facebook group that Father Reuben and Silvana can tell you about. But what we've tried to do on this website is put everything we can think of to help you get started. Under this first section, there's a 9-step guide to getting started with your first prayer space. Under news and stories, there's probably 300 or 400 stories from prayer spaces around the world. Primary schools and secondary schools and church schools and state schools as well, who've hosted prayer spaces. Under resources, there's more than 100 different prayer activities, a bit like the ones that Silvana and Father Reuben have put out today. There's more than 100 different activities. You can download all the resources for free from there, and they'll explain how to do them. So there's lots and lots of resources on there. Please register with the website. It's all free, and download whatever you need to get started. Now, I just wanted to pause here. This is kind of a mission statement for prayer spaces in schools, and it's what we believe about prayer spaces. They enable children and young people. The word enable is important. Prayer spaces are not designed to teach. We're not depositing, we're not teaching information. There are other places to teach. You've got your catechism classes and there's other lessons within the school. A prayer space isn't a teaching context, it's an enabling, it's an invitation to experience. Enables children and young people of all faiths and none to explore spirituality, faith and life's big questions in a safe and a creative and an interactive way. The reason we've come up with that sentence is because we believe this is exactly what Jesus is like. Jesus enables all people, of all faiths and none. When we look at the gospel stories, Jesus didn't have a list and check, are you part of the, are you a child of Israel? Or are you from another faith? Do you have any faith at all? Okay, you can follow me, but you can't. He just says, come follow me. I don't mind if you're confused about me. I don't mind if you're unsure whether I'm the Messiah or not. Just come and follow me. You'll figure it out. Let me show you some things. Let me tell you some stories. You'll figure it out. Jesus doesn't introduce himself as we did at the beginning of this seminar. Hello, I'm Phil, I'm a Christian, I'm married, I've got 3 children. Jesus didn't do that with people. Hello, I'm the Messiah. I'm sitting with my Father in heaven. When I was baptised, a dove came down. Were you there? It was really good. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus just said, come follow me. You'll figure it out. Yeah? When people asked him questions, he often replied with questions. Jesus doesn't seem too bothered with answering all our questions. He doesn't seem too bothered with us getting our theology and our doctrine right. Sorry, you can stone me later if you want. But Jesus often replies with, what do you think? Or, well, let me tell you a story. You'll figure it out. Come and follow me, get close to me, and you'll figure out what God is like. Yeah? Does that make sense? I think that's what we're doing with prayer spaces, because I think that's what Jesus was like. Come and join in. Come and belong. Come and try praying. See what happens. You might be surprised. I remember being in a prayer space, one of the first prayer spaces, and we had an activity, a sorry activity, and it was an invitation to the students to write something that they were sorry for on a bit of paper and then tear it up and put it in the bin. We decided not to call it a sin bin, just because that was too funny, too religious. We just said, tear up a bit of paper and put it in the bin. And at the end of this lesson, I asked the students what their favourite activities were and how they felt when they did some of these activities. And there was one girl, she was about 13 years old, she put her hand up and she said, when I tore up my sorry and I put it in the bin, I felt warm and tingly. I felt something physically happened. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Do you know what? That reminds me of a little verse in one of the letters that John wrote in the back of the Bible. I don't know if you've ever read the Bible, I said to this girl, but there's a little letter that John wrote, and it says this: when we confess things, when we say sorry to God, he's faithful, he's good. He forgives us and he heals us. He wipes us clean. I wonder if maybe that's what you experienced. Maybe that warm, tingly feeling was God healing you. And she's like nodding and nudging her friends. She might not understand it yet, but she's experienced something. Yeah? She's experienced something of the presence of God, the forgiveness, the healing of God. It might take her a long time to understand it theologically, but she'll never forget it because she felt it. Yeah? You know what it's like. Those of you who are teachers, you probably remember the teachers that you had when you were at school. I would be surprised if you remembered much of what the teachers taught you, but I bet you remember the teachers that loved you, that valued you, that cared for you, that cheered you on, that said, well done, you're brilliant. And that may be why you're teachers today, because someone set an example. We remember those experiences, and I think that's what we're doing with these prayer spaces. We're not trying to teach everything. We are trying to provide an experience of the love of God, the hospitality of God, because that's what changes lives. Yeah? Amen? Yeah. So this second part, we found it's really important that we try and connect local churches, local parishes, local Christians to serve the schools. We found that prayer spaces work best when you have a group of volunteers, a group of Christians from the parish, from the church, who can come and serve the school. Some schools try to run prayer spaces on their own, Some schools do them very well, but most schools who run them on their own, the teachers feel very tired at the end. It's quite difficult, as we found yesterday. You know, we had 2 classes, primary school classes, didn't we? Well, some of Annabelle's classes were there, and it was glorious chaos, wasn't it? It was wonderful and messy. And, you know, Father Ruben's, there's a group of children over there, there's no adult over there, we need an adult. You know, you need enough adults with a class. I would say with a class of 30 children, you probably need 4 adults. To make it work really well, I think you need 4 adults. So maybe there's a teacher, but you need a few others. Because some of the prayer activities work much better when you've got a team member, an adult on them. So the reason I'm putting this on first, recruit a team, is because it's more important than the prayer activities. In our experience, the magic, the wonder, the prayer activities are great, but that's not where the magic happens. The magic happens in the people. If you've got the right people, a good team hosting your prayer space, it's going to go well. If you've got the best prayer activities but only 1 adult, it might go well. But it might not. Because some of the children, some of the young people will find it difficult to engage in the activities. They need someone's help, someone's support. So the first thing to think about when you're preparing to run a prayer space is, who is going to help me? Don't think about the what am I going to put in it first. Think about who is going to help you to run it. If you're a teacher here today, who is the local parish? Who's the priest? Who's the, I don't know what it would be in your context. Who are the volunteers? Who are the parents who might be able to help me to host this really, really well? Yeah? Is that helpful? So second thing, the room, the space. Some prayer spaces are, sorry about how dark these pictures are, some prayer spaces are in a big space like a hall or a big classroom, and maybe they'll create some tents, some gazebos to break up the space into different activities. Most of the 3,000 or so prayer spaces that there have been so far would be in a classroom, in a room a little bit like this, and there would be some different activities spread around the room, and we'll look at the activities some more in a moment. This is a prayer space in a Catholic school in Austria, where they've been really taking off. I love this one. This is a prayer space in a classroom in Pakistan. Got this huge world map, and then these children are choosing countries to pray for. So prayer spaces can happen in lots of different spaces. In England, in a town called Bradford, my friend Louise ran her first prayer space in a cupboard. They didn't have any space in the school. The head teacher said there's no space that you can use, and Louise said, let me have a look around, and she found a cupboard. And she put 3 prayer activities in this little cupboard, and there was her and 1 other parent, and they had 5 children at a time came and visit this prayer space in a cupboard. At the end of the day, the head teacher came and said to Louise, all I've heard in the corridors outside my room all day is children and staff saying, have you been to the prayer space? Have you been to the prayer space? Have you been to the prayer space? So I want to have a look for myself. And so the head teacher came and looked at the prayer space. She said, this is fantastic. We're going to do it again, and next time I'll give you a classroom. So if you want to, if you get the opportunity to run a prayer space, but only in a small space, that's fine. Start small, start just for a day. What will happen is it will get bigger and it will get longer next time, because they really, really work. So that's the room, and then the main thing I want us to look at now is some of the prayer activities.